Good seeing everybody. We were just gone to California for a few weeks, and last Sunday, I was watching you online, sitting eating my breakfast early in the morning in California, and drinking my coffee. And I was listening to Caleb share. If you hadn't heard that, you need to make sure you go back and listen to it because he talks a lot about some updates on our church that are important. He made a couple statements, and I thought, I'm just going to what I wanted to do is after he made certain statements, I wanted to know what the reaction was. I wanted them to turn the camera around and say, how is the reaction, right? But I couldn't do that. So if you have reactions, tell me afterwards. I want to hear all your reactions to what Caleb said last week, if you haven't told me that. And then, but what I remember, one thing that stood out to me, a couple things I just want to give a couple commentaries on. He says, we are no longer operating as a senior pastor-led church. You know, we've been heading this direction for a long time, even before I was even thinking about retirement, even before COVID. And the last year, though, we've actually been trying it on and operating that way. And also for me, I get to be a part of the preaching planning team, the teaching and planning team. So I actually do that as well there. And so it's interesting, after I listened to Caleb, I wanted to talk to somebody and process. And so I happened to be staying with the pastor of Palo Alto, one of the pastors of Palo Alto, and they're a good friend of mine named Ron. And we went on this massive, long walk, and we just talked, and he just asked me all kinds of questions, and they were such good questions. I'm going to let you in on a couple of the highlights of those questions. One thing he was just talking about in this conversation, he was talking about, well, what were you doing as a senior pastor? Weren't you pursuing God? And I thought, oh yeah, I was. I was pursuing God's will as a senior pastor-led church. And I said, and so he goes, well, like, what's the difference, And so as we were talking about it, I began, talking about, well, God led us. I mean, we've been doing this for 26 years, senior pastor, and God's always in that, and I'm always pursuing the will of God, at best I know how, with good counsel. We have a great counsel, and we have a team, and I've always had more and more of a team around me, so he's thinking, like, well, what's the difference? I mean, you have a team around you, and I said, well, it's a lot different. And so as I talked about it, I started explaining to him, like, the difference in how it feels. And so he was asking me, like, well, for you, from your side, what's it like? Because you're making a big shift here on how these things are going. And I thought that was really interesting. So I had to really think about that. And I said, well, at first it was harder, quite a bit harder, because it was so much more vulnerable. It was so much more about me saying my heart more, not holding things back. And that was harder for me to do in this group because I've been operating this way, right? And I said, but really though, once I got past some of that hardness of it, because I've been doing this for 26 years differently, it was better, And I said, what do you mean by that? He says, well, I felt like this, it was less on me and even the group, and it was more on Jesus. It was like, it took the responsibility. We slowed down and we made sure we were putting the responsibility to lead us on Jesus. And he goes, well, describe how that might look like. And I said, well, it's like, a lot less brainstorming, a lot more praying, a lot more slowing down and listening to both to God and one another together. And that was different than a team. That's why it was different than a team. And so, And I also said, and he said, well, how's it going? And I said, well, so far, I don't know, we're new in this, it's so far so good, because as we've been trying to learn how to lead a church in this way, the best way I describe it is the fruit has been different. It's not like we're making lots of decisions. Mostly it's about God working in us. But those conversations, I used to come out of meetings a little tired and exhausted from the dings you have as you interact, and and now I come out feeling like, oh, we've connected to Jesus, and it gives me this connection where by that vulnerability, I'm actually transformed by meetings, not deformed by meetings, right? So that's a couple things I would just say. That's what we know so far. It's all pretty new. But I wanted to say to you, make sure that we want you to ask questions and make sure you feel comfortable with asking me. I would love to know your reaction to that statement, that we're no longer a senior pastor at church, like, yay, or like, oh, I don't know what I think about that, but talk to me about it because I didn't have a chance last week to be here. And the second one is more tied into what we're moving towards in our series right now. And I want to say, last week, I wanted to give you an update too, is last week, as soon as I flew in, the next day, the next 2 days, we were meeting with David Hughes. And David Hughes he's been a gift to us because he's been a practicing senior pastor for many, many years, and he's turned over his church, he's still in his church, and he's very well trained in a place of teaching people how do you do this as a group. And he's like, I would say if you find someone in the sage category, it's not very often. I would say he's in the sage category. So us being around him all this time, he was so helpful and affirming and showing the things, and it was just really good. So what I want to say to you guys, those of you who prayed for us, which some of you didn't, but some of you did, thank you for that. And those who thought they should pray for us and didn't, somehow God will use that too. All right? So thanks for that.